Hello, and welcome to Notes on History. I'm Paul Stoetzel. This video is the first in a series that will appear under the genealogy tab at the top of the page, assuming that you're watching this video on notesonhistory.org. From time to time, I'm going to post some videos on here about the Alsatian Stoetzels and their relatives, both because I want to preserve my own family history, and also because I want to talk a little bit about genealogical research, and what better place to start than what I know about the most. Of course, not for nothing, if you're considering commissioning Notes on History to assist you with your own family history project, then the videos in this series will give you an idea of the kind of research I can assist you with. Now, many of the Stoetzels in the United States today are descended from John Stoetzel, who came to the United States in 1850. What I'm going to do in this video is present documentation, some of which will be available on notesonhistory.org, to show the same family on both sides of the Atlantic. This is somewhat important because in future videos, I'll look at some documentation tracing the family back farther in Europe, and of course we all want to make sure that I'm looking at the right family. Two of John's great-grandsons, Fred Stoetzel and Albert or Buzz Stoetzel, did some genealogical research back in the 1960s and 70s, and a lot of their notes have come my way over the years, especially those of Fred, who happens to be my great-grandfather. Fred wrote in his notes that he had living memory of his grandfather, John's son Henry, but where most of his information came from isn't quite clear. There simply were not well-defined standards for research in those days, especially if you were conducting research for your own curiosity. John Stoetzel and his family show up here in the United States in two different documents in the year 1850. The first is the passenger manifest from the ship Havre out of the port of Havre, where we find Johann Stoetzel, Barbara, Henry, Salome, and Magdalena. They arrived in New York on October 8, 1850, and by the time the U.S. Census was taken in December of that year, we find the same family living in Lyons, New York, in the home of a tailor named Henry Bish. On a side note, Henry Bish is married to John's daughter Barbara. That's a different discussion. I won't take up your time going into that, but for now, understand that when John and his family came to New York, they presumably traveled down the Erie Canal to Lyons to live with their daughter Barbara and her husband. We see them here listed as John, Barbara, Henry, Sally, and Lana. When you do the math and compare their ages with the passenger manifest, you will see that we're just about spot on, except for Sally, who's just a tiny little bit off in terms of age. Being 1 or 2 years off in terms of age on a mid-19th century document isn't too bad in genealogical research terms. There's also a 23-year-old John Stoetzel, spelled a little differently, not too far away, living in a town called Phelps with his wife Laura and infant son George. Now, the question should then be, can we find the same family back in France? It turns out that there are a number of documents that we can look at. Fred and Albert's notes mentioned the name of the town they believed the family was from. They believed that the family was from a town called Kutzenhausen in Alsace-Lorraine. How did they know that? I have no idea how they came up with that, but it's a clue worth following up on because the French did a census of their own in 1846, 4 years before the Stoetzels came to the United States. Presumably, this is not information that Fred and Buzz had access to back in the 1960s. If we look at the census for Kutzenhausen in 1846, lo and behold, here's a group of Stoetzels enumerated in that town right here. Their names are, in French, Jean, Barbe, another Jean, Georges, Henri, Salome, and Madeleine. They seem to be awfully French rather than the German that the family always assumed that they were, but they're all here, plus one more, a son named George, who I actually have a lot to say about, but that's a different discussion altogether. Also, Barbara is listed under a different last name. That's another story as well, one that I haven't quite tacked down yet. So the names are all here on both sides of the Atlantic. The ages are all acceptably similar, but let's not stop there. Another census was taken in France shortly after the Stoetzels left, and we don't find any Stoetzels living in Kutzenhausen in that one. So the Kutzenhausen Stoetzels are gone, but we do have them living in the States. We don't have to stop there, though. Just for good measure, we have some other documents that we can use to show that these are, in fact, the same group of people. For example, Here is Henry Stoetzel's birth record from France. We see here Henry Stoetzel, born in 1831, son of John Stoetzel, aged, I won't attempt to pronounce the actual French, age 28, and Barbara Siegwald, aged 34. One of the things that stands out about this family is that Barbara is a little bit older than John. We don't make judgments about that these days, but it was rare enough back then that it stands out as a marker that we can use to say that this is the right family. This document, by the way, also has John's signature. He signed it here as Johannes Stoetzel, with an umlaut and everything. So the records are recorded in French, but he certainly seems German now, doesn't he? We can also use this signature to identify him elsewhere. It's a very distinct signature that he has there, and we can find it on other records. What records you're dying to know? I know you are. How about the birth records for John's son John from 1824? Here it is here. We see Johann's signature right here, and it's a dead ringer for the one on Henry's certificate, or record rather, as if Barbara's maiden name wasn't enough. And there's a couple others like this for the other children, all with the same parents, all of the correct age, but why beat a dead horse? In the coming weeks, you'll see more posts like this pop up, mixed in with other videos about various other historical topics. If you like this video, be sure to like Notes on History on Facebook, or of course leave your family-friendly comments below. Of course, if you'd like to see documents like these for your own family, please make sure you visit www.notesonhistory.org, where you can commission assistance with your own family research project. Thanks for listening.